Hey, welcome back to Ecommerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and ISBA. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by Aaron Alpeter. Aaron, we've got a pretty exciting season coming up. Do you want to give a quick kind of overview of what this season at Ecommerce on Tap is going to entail?
Yeah, first up, Happy New Year, Nathan. I missed you the last month or so, and we'll catch up here in a minute. But e-commerce on tap, we really have a lot of fun together. We take a well-known D2C company, we reverse engineer their supply chain, we talk about their founding story, and then talk about their exit potential. So it's really meant for people who kind of want some entertainment, but really want to learn something along the way. And it's certainly the highlight of my week every time we drop an episode.
Yeah, I'm excited for this because for me, when it comes to jewelry, which is the category we're covering, this season, we're going to cover some of the fastest growing jewelry e-commerce brands like Mejuri, Jaxxon, just to name a few, and really dive deep on them. But in this episode, we're going to give more of an overview of the jewelry category as a whole. We're going to do a deep dive on the supply chain. How do you start and sell a jewelry brand? How do you kind of have a strong go-to-market strategy? What are the top e-commerce brands in this category doing? And we've done a ton of research to prepare for this. I mean, I'm looking through our notes right now and it's like pages and pages long. So if you are interested in, jewelry as a category, this is definitely going to be super interested. And I'm excited to dive in. But I guess before we do so, I know you had a pretty interesting tidbit that I want to touch on real quick.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be a quiet holiday break, but that was not the case. So Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, is now the most famous person in e-commerce logistics. So she's the president of Mexico, and around, I think it was December 19th, her government changed the EMEX program, which is the regulations for how you can import and export from Mexico. And they instituted a 35% tariff on all apparel goods, effectively closing the 321 loophole for these companies. And so this has caused an enormous amount of consternation with affected brands where, you went in on the 19th thinking that you had a 321 setup and you were going to save money on taxes by shipping things from China into Mexico and then into the US. And now that loophole has been closed, and it was closed immediately. And so there is a lot of conversation going on. People are looking for new 3PLs, trying to figure out, is this really going to be there? Is there lobbying going to happen to maybe get a stay on this or what? And a good time for us to launch Slotted a couple months ago, because there's been a lot of people reaching out and looking for new providers just with that tool. But I also found it was ironic that Shein is in the spelling of her name. That's one of the companies that she's going after. But I mean, there's no bigger news in e-commerce logistics than this right now.
Yeah, no, it's pretty insane. I saw the news and I was like, wow, I know so many apparel brands that are shipping through Section 321 to get those, duty savings. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, I know quite a few brands scrambling, trying to figure out, what to do. And I think on the other hand, too, when I look at it from Sourcify's perspective, we've got a small team in Mexico. You can't just kind of pick up your apparel supply chain and move it to Mexico overnight, like the president, put this, law into practice. So it's kind of crazy to see. I know a lot of brands scrambling. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to Sourcify. We've got a team on the ground there that can help. And it's it's a really kind of crazy time. I don't think many people thought this was how the new year would start for them.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I want to hear about how your New Year's went. I mean, we could not be in more different climates right now. I'm here in Montreal. It is negative 15 degrees Celsius. And where are you?
Yeah, I decided to start the new year by kind of checking off a bucket list item. And so I'm in the Philippines, outside of Cebu, and I just went diving with whale sharks. So these are like, probably 18 to 25-foot sharks that are, harmless. I mean, when you first get in the water, you're kind of like taken aback and a bit, scared by just this massive shark right, around you. And there was, multiple of them in this area that I was swimming and diving in. And it was just a really just incredible experience. I mean, I've never swam next to an animal that big by any means. And it's just really cool to see. So yeah, checked off a bucket list item to start the new year. That's for sure.
How did that get onto your bucket list? I've done like snorkeling with sea turtles in Puerto Rico, and that was pretty cool. But the ocean's big. There's a lot of big stuff in it. But why did that get on your list?
Yeah, I had a friend who, had done this before and posted like a photo and video, and I just thought it was pretty incredible. And so I put it on my bucket list, and I was like, I really want to, try to do this, and found a, reasonably cheap flight to Manila, and here we are. So, that's how it goes sometimes, right?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, I guess before we dive into jewelry, it's probably worthwhile for us to give a little bit of an overview on the new format. So, do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, e-commerce on tap really originally started interviewing e-commerce founders, doing deep dives on their business. And as Aaron joined as a co-host, we thought it'd be super fun to do deep dives on, larger e-commerce businesses, typically $100+ million in revenue. I mean, I know my favorite episode from last season was Liquid Death. What was your favorite episode, by the way, Aaron?
Oh, I liked Merit Beauty, Harry's, Mejuri's one that I referenced back as we were getting ready for this one. There were a lot of companies I love profiling.
Yeah, Merit Beauty was a great one. I mean, if you haven't listened to that yet, I highly recommend going back and checking it out. I mean, that founder just has an amazing story. But I think what we really wanted to do is kind of categorize each season. So this kind of part of e-commerce on tap, we're doing deep dives on jewelry companies. We've got 4 companies in the pipeline. I mean, we have personal experience at Sourcify, sourcing jewelry around the world. And I know Isba has, hands-on experience working with these jewelry brands from a logistics and forecasting standpoint as well. So I think both personally, we know a lot about this category, but at the end of the day, we really listen to your feedback, right? And it sounded like people wanted more of a kind of in-depth or expert approach to a specific field and area and category. And so that's what we're doing. I mean, these episodes aren't necessarily just for entertainment. I think they're really for people that want kind of to be on the cutting edge of this category and have a deep dive of companies. And so each season will have a common theme. This one, obviously is jewelry, and episodes are going to be dropping every other week instead of every week. So that way we can do a deeper dive on each company. We've got some kind of inside interviews with different operators and founders at these companies as well. And so, the first episode of a season is going to be a deep dive into the industry where we really talk about the history, the major players, essentially why things are the way they are, and the supply chain of the brands. So I'm excited. I mean, I think this is going to be awesome. We really admire and appreciate everyone that leaves a review, reaches out to us on LinkedIn or Twitter. I mean, the feedback we've been getting on e-commerce on tap has been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and again, I'm excited for this new format. The intention is to take someone who doesn't know anything and maybe not quite then get them up to expert level, but get them pretty close to it.
I'm curious. I mean, Aaron, you've seen quite a lot of unique jewelry around the world. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, I would say the 2 examples that come to mind for me was seeing the crown jewels in London. That was pretty cool. So if you're ever in the Tower of London, a lot of big, shiny, expensive things that are there, which are pretty cool. And so that's on one end of the spectrum. And then I'll always remember being in St. Petersburg with my wife, and we went to this old, like massive Russian flea market. It was about 3 square miles large, and they had everything from U.S. military uniforms, which is kind of disconcerting, to World War II artifacts, to everything you think of. But they had these little Soviet linen pins that people used to wear. And so I grabbed a couple of those because I thought those were historical and fun. But yeah, kind of 2 very opposite ends of the spectrum kind of come to mind there.
Yeah. For me, I always think about like the sentimental value of jewelry, right? Like the only piece of jewelry I wear is this necklace. It's a chai, which in Yiddish means kind of good luck and good life. And I got it for my bar mitzvah when I was 13, and have worn it ever since. And I hope one day when I have a son that I'll hand it down to him. So I think it's really just sentimental to me, and I think that's kind of to me where the real value of jewelry stems from. I'm not nearly as into these diamonds, and there's this whole episode we'll go into versus lab grown or mined diamonds, and it's just an interesting dynamic that's happening in the world right now of lab grown versus mined diamond. So when it comes to jewelry, in my opinion, and it's something that I learned kind of our last season of e-commerce on tap, as we started diving into different jewelry companies like Brilliant Earth and Mejuri, where jewelry has such different classifications and it's changed so much through history, right? I mean, on one hand, you have luxury jewelry, which I think of like a luxury brand, right? I think of like a Tiffany and Co. or like a Gucci or something of that nature. And then you kind of have this like regular or non-luxury or custom jewelry, which, has a lot of different types of material used, different level of craftsmanship. I mean, for most people, like I don't know, I'll talk in first person, but for me, if I look at a gold bracelet, I won't know at all if it's, a luxury or non-luxury or what the kind of craftsmanship is. But if you talk and really, learn from these different brands and how they position themselves, you can start to understand and see different tidbits, right? In terms of, how the differences arise and how they look and how the kind of intrinsic value will be less because, the jewelry might be made from different alloys that are easily tarnished or corrodes more easily. So it's an interesting dynamic, especially when you dive into the materials that are used and the way that these, bracelets or necklaces or whatever it may be are made. But it's something to consider, I think, as you're starting an e-commerce brand. Who do you want to target? How do you want to manufacture your products? Because that's all going to translate into this kind of luxury versus non-luxury versus custom jewelry dynamic that we have.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that will catch a lot of people if they're sourcing, they don't really know it, is they say, hey, I want I want to make a really nice necklace, really nice ring. And you can get pricing that just is like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is awesome. But when you look at it in that manufacturing process, the alloys that were used, that jewelry may only have a usable wear life of a couple of years because it's going to tarnish or it's going to fade or things like that. And so you just have to know about that quality before you go into it.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, most people like me, I feel like don't have a clue, right? I mean, even the kind of this necklace, for example, is not the original necklace that I got on my bar mitzvah. It's the original high, but it's like my pendant is the original, but the necklace, because I wear it every day constantly, it gets tarnished, or the way that it's made, certain kind of pieces start breaking, and it's gold, but it's I guess if you even wear gold every day, it starts to get some wear and tear. So that's how it goes. But I mean, let's talk real quick about the history of jewelry, and then we're going to dive more into the supply chain and different brands that are really kind of taking over this market.
Yeah, we'll have a bunch of blogs on the Sourcify website about the history of jewelry. So if you're interested in going to the minutia there, but just know it's been around for a very long time. People used to start with bones and shells and stones and things like that. And it's changed. I mean, you think about every major civilization that you read about, they were making jewelry. So whether it was the Greeks and the Romans, the medieval folks, the Renaissance, the Victorian Industrial Revolution, all those sorts of things. And where we are today is in a mass production environment. And there's pieces where in the current iteration of jewelry, there's a big focus on ethical sourcing, sustainability, and this use of lab-grown gemstones is really the forefront of where that industry is today.
Yeah, in terms of lab grown, I would kind of refer them back to that Brilliant Earth episode. I mean, we really went deep on lab grown versus, real from the earth diamonds, and it was pretty fascinating. I mean, I didn't know much about lab grown diamonds before that, and it's pretty, I don't know, incredible / crazy how much this part of the market has grown.
Yeah, pulling diamonds out of the air is effectively what they're doing, which is kind of cool.
Oh, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I was really blown away by it. But I guess, when it comes to jewelry and e-commerce, traditionally you would kind of become a jeweler, which you'd be designing and creating your own custom, pieces of jewelry. But I think when it comes to e-commerce, most people are trying to produce jewelry more at scale, right? I mean, unless you're selling a bracelet for $5, $10, $25,000 a pop, most brands that we see in the e-commerce market have a much lower price point, right? Like Jaxxon, the men's, and I think they have a few female items now that have come out. Most of their items are around $100 or so, sometimes $250. But, that's a brand that has scaled to close to $100 million in revenue in the past few years. And, they're not at that high luxury price point, but their products showcase that quality. And I think it's kind of a similar dynamic with Mejuri from my perspective as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's one of these things where you can build a very large business in this category, with, I wouldn't say without that much effort, but like obviously there's effort involved, but it's not unheard of to be a 9-figure brand in this area. And I think what's interesting about this is the manufacturing process. And so I really nerded out on this when we went through and looked at it. And I just want to kind of talk through some of these manufacturing processes. And the first one was what they call the lost wax casting method. Have you heard about this? You've probably seen this in factories.
I've seen it once. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah. So basically, what they do is they make a mold, and they fill that mold with wax, and that wax almost looks like it's like a tree. And so if you're making a bunch of rings or pendants or things like that, this tree is going to have all of these different rings coming off of it. And then what they do is they encase that wax mold into plaster, and then what they'll do is they'll kind of put this into the molten metal, whether that's silver or gold or whatever. That wax melts away. They get to reuse it elsewhere, and then they are left with basically this silver tree or this gold tree. And then what they're able to do is to break off the rings or the pendants from that tree, and they're able to go forward, which is it's pretty cool. We'll put some videos in the show notes of just like how they go about doing that.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I mean, there's such a different dynamic in terms of jewelry manufacturing, right? Because on the other hand, you have die striking, which, you might have heard of, where you get a die cut. And this is where the mass kind of scale and production comes with jewelry, right? So to get a die cut, typically you start with a CAD, a computer aided design, send that to your factory. They then produce a mold based on that die cut. That's basically like a very hardened steel, the die of the steel. And they basically like kind of stamp out or press out, these shapes, these jewelry items from that die. And it's really, used for mass production. It's generally limited to flat or kind of slightly domed forms. And then on the other hand, you have, CNC milling and turning. So you use a kind of computer numerical control machine that then, can cut more precisely and kind of use more different types of designs for more precision. And that also uses CAD software. So I think in general, if you're just tuning in and don't know how do you actually, start producing jewelry, basically your first step is going to be to get a CAD drawing done. So you're going to want to find an engineer who is comfortable using a CAD drawing, using computer aided design. Like AutoCAD is one of the softwares that's out there that is really widely used. And that's how you're going to basically start designing your jewelry. And if you want to test it, the easiest way to test is just 3D print it, right? A lot of 3D printers use CADs as well. So that's what I would do. I mean, if I was going and starting a jewelry brand, I would start with a CAD drawing, then I would 3D print it, see if I like the sizing, the shape, the form. And then once I've got a CAD that I like, I'd probably go get a die cut, to be able to produce it at scale.
Yeah, and these are kind of the four main ways that jewelry is made today. We'll get into some other ones here, but if you're kind of like, okay, what is this stuff? Think of like lost wax casting as plaster of Paris, right? So you're basically making a negative and you're putting that molten stuff into it to get your output. Die striking is like a stamp. So think of it as Play-Doh or making cookies. And then a CNC is basically a lathe. So if you've ever made like a baseball bat in your garage, that's how that's done. Some other stuff I think it's worth looking at is electroforming. And this is an electrochemical process that's used to deposit metal onto a mold or a pattern. And so this is kind of a more technical way of doing it. It creates very lightweight, hollow pieces. And it's different from electroplating, which is putting a coating of some metal onto things. So lots of jewelry will be electroplated. Not all jewelry will be electroformed. And so it's new and up and coming stuff. Another one that's out there is laser welding and soldering. And so this is really just meant for really small precision pieces. Could be used for sensitive repairs or things to your gemstones where, that ruby or sapphire can't withstand really high heat. And then lastly is just this, plating and surface treatment where, again, you're taking a thin layer of gold, rhodium, silver, whatever it's going to be, and you're coating that. So a lot of jewelry today, especially the costume type that you're talking about, is stainless steel that is wrapped in gold. And so it looks gold, but it's a lot cheaper because it is not 100% gold. And honestly, if it was 100% gold, you'd be able to bend it easily, and that wouldn't work either. So there are some reasons for doing that.
Yeah, and I think what most founders or operators should be aware of is kind of the consumer sentiment right now when it comes to jewelry in the marketplace, right? What we've seen is that people have become way more socially aware of the environmental concerns when it comes to mining these precious gems and metals and materials and extracting them from the earth. I mean, from an environmental perspective, it is very harmful, right? There's a lot of pollution and waste, and it, has a huge carbon footprint. And so I think there's been a few different brands that have grown a ton through either a lab grown approach with diamonds, or kind of the brilliant earth approach of turning air into diamonds. But it's a more sustainable, environmentally friendly approach to kind of create these precious materials rather than extracting them from the earth. And so I think that's a pretty unique angle that we've seen a lot of e-commerce brands tap into. And I think that's really kind of just at the cusp of growth. I mean, I think we're really going to see a lot more brands, have a positive impact on the environment in the jewelry category compared to, some of the brands that are incumbents in the industry.
Yeah, I don't think there's any such thing as sustainable mining out there. I remember in college, someone from Alcoa, the big aluminum company, came and spoke to us, and it was about sustainability. I'm like, well, you're cutting down the rainforest, you're digging the stuff, and then you're planting trees again. I guess that's better than not. But, most of these precious metals and gemstones are being mined. So I want to walk through where those are coming from, just in case, just so people are aware of it. So from a diamond perspective, Kimberley, South Africa is one of the largest producers of diamonds. This is the birthplace of the modern diamond industry. So if you think about De Beers and you've heard about those sorts of things, this is where the diamond rush started in the 19th century. And so you think of diamonds, you traditionally think of South Africa, and that was true for a very long time. Botswana has recently come online as a large mining operation. They have lots of different things that they've done. They're kind of setting their course as an ethical mining practice. So again, not sustainable, but ethical. So looking to treat their workers and the communities as well as they can. But really what changed everything was the discovery of the Arosa diamond mine in Russia, which is the largest diamond mining company in the world by volume. And they are known for large-scale production of industrial and gem quality diamonds. And they produce some of the world's largest quantities of rough diamonds, particularly in Siberia. A little bit tough to get Russian diamonds these days with sanctions, stuff like that. But then the last place that's really well known is actually Canada. And they are known for ethical and environmentally conscious mining practices. If you're looking at other gemstones and metals, Colombia is the biggest producer of emeralds. Sri Lanka is known as the Isle of Gems, and they're famous for sapphires, in particular blue sapphires. And Brazil is a significant producer of colored gemstones like amethyst, topaz, and tourmaline. So it's always interesting. You think about, the conquistadors and discovery of the New World. All of these interesting gemstones were discovered in the New World from these locations and brought back to Europe, and that's part of the reason why they were so highly sought after.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty insane to see these mines, and I've gone on YouTube and searched some of these mines in Africa, and it's kind of wild to see the videos of these mines, but it is super interesting. And on the other hand, when it comes to gold, this is something that I learned doing research for this episode, but China actually accounts for 11% of the total global output for gold in terms of mining gold and getting mined and extracting it from earth. The top producer for silver is actually Mexico, that is 24% of the global output. And then platinum is South Africa, where 64% of the globe's total production of platinum comes from South Africa. So it's pretty interesting to see how crucial South Africa is for jewelry production. I mean, I didn't realize, just kind of the importance of that region for this industry before diving into the category of jewelry.
Yeah, it's interesting how South Africa continues to be so important even 200 years later in mineral extraction and diamond extraction in particular. And yet most of the manufacturing does not happen in South Africa. This is still a dig it up, ship it elsewhere. And so when we look at where jewelry is actually produced, if you're looking at sheer production volume, the top 5 countries are China, India, Switzerland, Italy, and the UAE. And China in particular is really known as the leading global force in jewelry production and exports. They make about $11.8 billion worth of exports a year. India is not too far behind at 10.7 billion, and they're really on the ascent. I think that India benefits from a really abundant skilled labor workforce and a cultural reverence for jewelry. This is something that people literally have been making jewelry in India for thousands of years.
Yeah, and I think too, what's special about India is that if you're looking for something more unique or custom, there are, really kind of just a few places in the world that can do that. There's Jaipur, India, which is known as the Pink City, which is a global hub for these colorized gemstones. And there's all these different regions around the world that are really specialized in, unique custom jewelry. So there's Florence, Italy, there's Bangkok, Thailand, there's Istanbul, Turkey, and then there's, Dubai as well. And I mean, what's interesting is each little hub has its own flair, which, I think stood out to me during this research. And I mean, what did you find when it came to kind of more of a artisan or traditional feel?
Yeah, again, because the wonderful thing about jewelry is it doesn't have to be mass produced. You can do something that is very eclectic. Gold, you have places like Dubai. It's known as the city of gold for a reason. Florence, so Italy, Istanbul. I mean, there's lots of just historical context. I mean, Turkey is well known from the Byzantine Empire and all the gold work that they did. If you're looking more at silver, Mexico's the biggest silver producer. Taco Mexico is the silver capital of the world. You've got Bali in Indonesia, Cordoba, Spain, and then platinum, Tokyo, Antwerp, and New York are kind of the places that you go for this artisan stuff with these unique precious metals.
Yeah, but what I found interesting is I was actually in New Mexico, which has some of the tribes like the Navajo, and that's kind of where you really find these non-standard pieces of jewelry. And from my research, you see that in Venice, Italy, as well, kind of across the southwest of the U.S. and also outside of Moscow in Russia, which is pretty unique as well. And I think one thing that we're seeing as we went through the jewelry industry is that there's a lot of differences based on their past and based on the actual source of the jewelry in terms of the material source and how it's extracted. But there are a lot of certifications when it comes to this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll go through this quickly, and you can find more of this information on the SourceFi website. But the RJC, the Responsible Jewelry Council, is one that you should be aware of. The KPCS, the Kimberly Process Certification Scheme. This is specifically focused on diamonds, and it's trying to prevent the trade of conflict diamonds. You've got the Fair Trade Gold Certification, which is for jewelry manufacturers using gold in their products, and just other things that they're not jewelry specific, but are relevant to the industry. You've got CEDEX, the Supplier Ethical Data Exchange, ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and GOTS, which is the Global Organic Textile Standard. A lot of times you'll see manufacturers using textiles or fibers with their jewelry to make different pieces and things like that.
And I mean, it's just pretty incredible and pretty remarkable to see the size of the industry as well. I mean, it's like 360 billion in USD sales, which is pretty staggering for this industry. And the market's growing. It's growing at about 4.5% a year, which is awesome. China leads the pack in terms of revenue generation for the jewelry market. And it's just continuing to grow worldwide. The jewelry market in North America is about 67 billion. And it's growing, not super fast, but it's growing at about 1.6%. And it's, pretty remarkable to see because there's one major jewelry retailer in America. I didn't know the name of this jewelry company before, but it's Signet Jewelers, which is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange on the ticker SIG. And it's the largest specialty jewelry retailer with sales of $6.7 billion, which is pretty remarkable because surprisingly enough, Walmart and Amazon are number 2 and 3 after Signet, which is just pretty incredible of this company.
Just from a market size perspective, I mean, the largest player is only 10% of the market. And so you think about something that is this big, is still growing, and the largest player only has 10%. I mean, that's kind of unheard of. And so it's a pretty attractive thing as well. Nathan, if I'm a brand and I'm trying to evaluate whether or not I want to get into the jewelry sector, what sorts of questions would you ask?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with number one, how are you going to be different, right? I think at the end of the day, it's not that hard to start a jewelry brand from a manufacturing and supply chain perspective. I think what's harder in this market is the distribution. How do you draw attention? If I see two pieces of jewelry next to each other, from my naked eye, I'm not going to be able to tell the difference in the material right off the bat because I'm not an expert. But I would necessarily maybe resonate with a certain brand more because maybe it's more sustainable, or maybe it's from a unique place or has unique heritage or unique history. It could be a sales channel innovation where some of these upstart D2C brands have been taking market share that way from consumers. Or it could be kind of a technical integration where you can intertwine some sort of virtual reality or augmented reality experience with jewelry and kind of tell a story through technology as well. And so I think it's interesting, if you want to see a brand that has a more kind of sustainable supply chain approach to tap in to, I would really recommend listening to the Brilliant Earth episode we did on e-commerce on tap just last season. And that, I think, is just a remarkable showcase in terms of how you can create a difference in the market through your supply chain and telling that story. So it's interesting to see how these incumbents are fighting for staying power, but there's a lot of startups and upstarts in this category.
Absolutely. What do margins look like?
Yeah, I mean, margins are relatively high, right? I mean, typically, you see margins between 50 to 300% in terms of a markup for kind of higher end luxury jewelry. Silver, margins are generally lower due to lower, per volume unit value. And D2C margins, can be as low as 60%, but I've seen them as high as like 92% for some really, really high, like I guess well marketed brands. I'll put it that way. But I mean, I think that's kind of what you were saying. It's kind of when you understand the supply chain, you understand that, like, for example, with like a Cuban link chain, most of that Cuban link chain that's gold is not actually gold, right? It's mostly that material, whether it be alloy or whatever it may be, under that painted gold that they're painting the chain with. And so the margins in general for those type of products are very high. But when it becomes to more unique items or unique materials that are extracted in hard ways, the margins might not be as high, but the price point is going to be a lot higher, right?
Yeah. But I mean, even at 60%, you can build a great business off of 60% margins. I mean, the number of times I've had someone with a food startup come to me and say, "Hey, we've got 18% margins." You're like, that's tough. You got to sell a lot of stuff to build a business that way. But yeah, it's a very attractive business. It's not super consolidated. You don't have huge incumbents you're going after, and so it's pretty attractive. What are some of the risks that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going the extraction route with unique, materials like gold or silver, obviously commodity prices can move quite a bit. So that's something you have to be aware of. There's a lot of regulatory risk if you're, exporting from certain countries that might have different issues. Like, there's a lot of sanctions on Russia right now. So if you were working with a mine in Russia, all of a sudden you got to, switch up that source. There's definitely competition from lab grown alternatives right now. And I think more and more incumbents that were using, real diamonds or, real materials are now opening their eyes to a lab grown approach and trying to expand their business in that way as well. And I think there's just overall shifts in consumer preferences in terms of people wanting a more sustainable and minimalistic approach compared to kind of the traditional luxury market, which I think is cool. I mean, you mentioned how you're wearing a silicone wedding ring, which probably 20 years ago wasn't a thing at all, right?
Yeah.
And that's a new thing where I think millions, if not tens of millions, of people now wear silicone wedding rings because they need a symbol of resemblance to show their commitment to their marriage. But while they're living an active lifestyle, they don't want to wear, a gold ring or something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when it comes to some of the ways that these brands are separating themselves, there really isn't anything that's special about them, from what I'm seeing. Obviously, like content-driven marketing is a mega trend that a lot of people are doing. Mejuri does a great job using Instagram and TikTok to connect with some folks. You could, like you said, take the sustainability angle. So companies like Brilliant Earth do a good job of saying, "Hey, this is the ethical choice. No rainforest or people were harmed in the creation of these diamonds." But really, it's D2C, it's omni-channel, it's the subscription sort of thing that you see a lot of jewelry brands benefit from.
Yeah, and I think, as I take a step back and kind of try to extract what I learned just doing a deep dive on the industry, I think from a founder perspective or operator perspective, what I love is the margins, right? I mean, in general, your margins are going to be very strong. In general, your supply chain, unless you're really extracting, precious materials or diamonds from a mine, it's not going to be too complex. There could be, quality control issues. Let's say you're taking a necklace and, coating it with silver or gold. You could have quality control issues with that can arise pretty readily. So that's something that we've seen with different jewelry brands that, come to Sourcify because they've had quality control issues as, their necklaces or bracelets have faded faster than their customers wanted. And they need to find a way to produce those bracelets that can last longer, that won't fade as quickly because customers will complain about that, right? And so that's something that you definitely have to be aware of is that, when you first get your products from your factory, everything might look great, but in a month it might have faded and now you've got all these customer complaints. And so I think, those are kind of two key takeaways that I had. What stuck out to you, Aaron, with this?
It really is the perfect D2C product. It's lightweight, it's high AOV, it's something that was meant to be sent through the mail, quite frankly. I mean, some of these other things where you're trying to deliver a fridge or an exercise mirror, things like that, that is very cost prohibitive. But it's the perfect D2C product. You can also charge whatever you want because there are different tiers of quality. There's different tiers of perceptions, and so you can run a very successful business selling $50 necklaces and bracelets and rings. You can also run a successful business selling $10,000 pieces. And so just something that has this depth of pricing tiers, this depth of penetration around the world. I mean, it's if something looks great, you don't have to translate it, right? Like, this can be shipped anywhere around the world and it can be appreciated. And so it is a fantastic industry to get involved in. I know you mentioned a little bit around kind of quality issues and things like that, but how has Sourcify helped jewelry brands in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of two main approaches we take with brands in this category. Number one is they have margin challenges where, as they've grown, their margins have not increased with their factories. And so we, have found better factories for them that fit their scale that they're at and improve their margins, sometimes by as high as 22%. That's what comes to mind, what we did with a brand that was manufacturing in China. And number two is in this category, like I mentioned briefly, there is a lot of quality fade, meaning that, when your customers first get your products, it might appear to be great, but within a month or 3 months, you're going to start getting complaints. And so we really help brands, ensure that they're meeting their quality control requirements and that is translating into, long-term quality products. And then number three, we're always happy to talk to upstarts that are just getting started, that are looking to understand, hey, where's the best place for me to manufacture my jewelry? Can you answer any questions that I have about starting a jewelry brand and figuring out my supply chain here? We've taken brands from hundreds of thousands of dollars to almost $100 million in sales from a supply chain perspective and handling their sourcing and quality control and just ensuring that, they're working with the best factory in the world for their products. So I think our team really prides itself on our ability in this category. I mean, we've got just a ton of experience working with factories around the world here. And I love it. I mean, to me, jewelry, like I mentioned, is more sentimental. but I always think it's really cool to see new designs and new upstart approaches. I know there was a creator-led brand we were talking to the other week that, it's really cool to see just how you can combine a creator's audience with a unique design. And I think they're going to have a great launch. So yeah, that's kind of what Sourcefy does in this category in a nutshell. But, I think overall, I'm excited for this category. We've got quite a few episodes coming up doing deep dives on high growth companies in this category. I'm talking like 0 to 100 million in sales in 5 years and really strong margins. Just some pretty incredible stories we're going to cover. So we always appreciate you listening in to E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcefy and ISBA. Please like, subscribe, leave a review, and let Aaron and I know what you think about this new format and this category on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thanks again for tuning in.